Another business across the nation, airports reopened for business today, everywhere except Reagan National in Washington, D.C. But the airline industry may never be the same. A drastic drop-off in air travel is expected, and the cost of increased security could be crippling. Continental Airlines is already taking steps to cope with the new economics following the act of terror.
Today, because of that, Continental has announced that it will immediately reduce its long-term flight schedule by approximately 20%. That means it's a long term. We also announced, which is a more painful decision for me, is to furlough 12,000 of our valued employees.
Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta is expected to meet early next week with airline executives to discuss the situation. While there's great concern about the financial security of the airlines, a more immediate concern is passenger safety. It begins with baggage scanning, the last line of defense against hijackers. And it's already a new world out there. Here's ABC's Lynn Schur.
On the one hand, it's back to normal. Back to the airports, back to the planes, back to the skies.
May I see some ID, please?
But even at New York's suburban Westchester County Airport, a fraction of the size of LaGuardia, the new police presence is very visible.
Over here I see 2 police officers, right?
But for all the new layers of protection around the perimeter, this is the last line of defense, the baggage scanning checkpoint. So sensitive, we weren't even allowed to take close-up pictures of it today. There are already some new rules. No more knives allowed on board. No cutting instruments of any size or material. But the real issue, say the folks behind the machines, is the human factor. The individuals whose eyes determine who gets by and with what.
I try to, move around so I don't get tired.
Pamela Brown and Sagiti Frank work at security at Los Angeles International Airport. They say company rules limit the time baggage screeners should look at the scans to 30 minutes. But they say sometimes they wind up on duty for more than twice that long.
It's outrageous because sometimes people's eyes can get tired. People's eyes go bad on them, and they might start to see double.
And if they see double, then what might happen to something in a bag?
It might get past them.
Would you agree that there's a potentially dangerous situation when that happens?
Yes, I do.
Does it make you angry?
Yes. It's not safe. I don't think so.
Part of the problem for single moms like Sagiti Frank is that baggage screeners are paid very low wages, often less than those flipping hamburgers down the hall. Many have to work 2 jobs to feed the family. Little wonder they get tired. Some now got more than $9 an hour. But Sagiti started at her job for much less.
We were in jeopardy waiting for a bomb to be explode over $5.75 an hour.
The baggage screeners are not very good. It's not entirely their fault. The problem is they're very poorly trained.
Mary Schiavo, former Inspector General for the Transportation Department, says the exceptionally high turnover rate for security screeners means many have little experience. Aren't there regular training sessions they have to go through that are mandated by the federal government?
The federal government specifies some minimum level of training, but remember these screeners actually work for companies. They work for subcontractors. They don't work for the airlines. They don't work for the Federal Aviation Administration, and they aren't law enforcement officers.
Do you believe the government should take this over?
Absolutely. Not the FAA. I think that the government clearly must see at this juncture that airport security is national security and is a national law enforcement function.
What makes you think that if the government took over, you would have workers who were either better paid or more highly motivated?
Well, for one, they'd be more highly trained because a federal law enforcement officer has to go through extensive training, and you can reward them for performing the function well.
Like many others today, Schiavo looks across the pond at the good examples set by European nations. In England, for example, the screening procedures are similar to ours, but a U.S. government report found that wages are higher, turnover is considerably lower, and performance seems better. The real question, of course, is how much American passengers are willing to endure to feel safe. Lengthy hand checks of every single piece of luggage, maybe more severe limits on what you can carry on board. No more suitcases on wheels. Certainly, there will be longer lines and a longer wait. neither of which is unusual for anyone who's traveled overseas.
The lines in England are basically, you have to be 2 hours before your flight time in England standard. And now it's gone from an hour to 2 hours here, so it's no change for me, it's standard.
We will be boarding that moment.
Whether these passengers will have to get used to it may be determined at a meeting next week between the Transportation Secretary and executives from the major carriers. For many, a critical item on that agenda ought to be how much we value the people who are supposed to be looking out for us.
Joining us now again is our aviation expert, John Nance. John, you have believed for a long time that the government should be taking over security in all airports, that in fact is long overdue.
Very long overdue, Elizabeth. Basically, it's scandalous, the ridiculous, the way that this system does not function. All the things that Mary Schiavo said are correct. I've been saying them for 15 years, too. This system is broken as far as doing an honest job and a correct job. And it's not because of the people. It's because of no standards. And the federal government has to take this over. And I mean yesterday.
The federal government, do you mean the FAA? Because Mary Schiavo said not the FAA.
Well, I trust the FAA on a lot of things, but I think this is really a law enforcement situation. I would be a little bit more comfortable if it was some other phase of government. But the main thing is it has to be federalized and standardized. That's the most important thing, standardized at a high level. And people will be a lot more willing to put up with inconvenience if they're dealing with thoroughly trained professionals. That's what we haven't had.
A lot of the security measures in place now were also in place in 1991 after the Persian Gulf War, and then were phased out because the American public got tired of the inconvenience. Do you see the same thing happening, or has this really changed us?
If we mishandle this, the same thing might happen. But if we put things into place, as I say, that are standardized and professional, if all the changes we make sense, the public will put up with them and they will accept them. What we mustn't do is mindless things like asking 3 questions. You suppose those hijackers on Tuesday answered all those 3 questions at the counter correctly? Of course they did. Those things have been worthless from the very beginning.
All right, John Nance from Seattle, thank you tonight.